JP felt a rush of excitement. A surge of energy so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. His mind raced with possibilities. He could feel the world outside calling to him. It wasn't just the power of his house, his wives, or his children, no, the world itself was his to command now. He looked at the snake, his thoughts swirling. What do I need to do? The serpent's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, sensing JP's ambition. You must shed what remains of your weakness, the snake whispered. Only then can you fully embrace your true nature. Power is not given, it is taken. You have already tasted its sweetness, but you must drink deeper. For a moment, JP felt the weight of those words. He had wanted power, craved it, but there had always been something holding him back, something that had tethered him to the miserable existence of his old life. That hesitation, that weakness, had now been stripped away. He was a leader now. He was a king. And no one would dare challenge him. The next morning, JP stood in front of the mirror. His reflection was no longer just his own. The serpent's influence had taken hold so deeply that he could see it in every line of his face. He was no longer human. He was something else entirely, a creature of desire, of ambition, of control. He smiled, a cold, calculating smile. The room was silent, but in his mind, the whispers of the snake echoed, filling him with purpose. It is time, the voice said. Your first test awaits. JP walked out of his room, his movements smooth and predatory. His wives, who had been avoiding him, now looked at him with a mixture of fear and awe. He could see it in their eyes, the respect, the trembling hesitation. They no longer saw him as the lazy, pathetic man he had once been. No, now they saw a ruler. A monster. And that was exactly what he wanted. He entered the kitchen, where Lara was preparing breakfast. She didn't look up at him, but the tension in the air was thick. You know, JP said, his voice smooth as silk, I don't need to pretend anymore. I don't need to live like this. Lara froze. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the spoon. She slowly turned to face him, her face pale. I don't know what's happened to you, she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. But I want the man I married back. The man who cared about me. Who cared about our family. JP's gaze turned cold, his eyes narrowing to slits. The hunger for control surged within him, and without thinking, he stepped closer to her, his presence suffocating. He could feel her fear radiating off of her, could see her struggling to stand her ground. You don't understand, Lara, he said softly, each word dripping with venom. I'm not that man anymore. I'm better than that. I am something more, and you will learn to accept that. Lara opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She was trembling now, her breath quickening as she looked into his eyes, eyes that were no longer human. I won't let you ruin us, JP, she whispered. I won't let you tear this family apart. JP smirked, his lips curling upward. You have no choice. None of you do. And just like that, she knew it was over. There was no reasoning with him anymore. He was no longer the man she had married. He was a monster. Days passed, and JP's grip on his household grew tighter. He no longer needed to say a word. His very presence commanded obedience. His wives, terrified and broken, obeyed without question. Even the children, though they were too young to understand the full extent of their father's transformation, cowered before him. But that was not enough. The outside world, the world beyond the walls of his crumbling home, was still beyond his reach. He could feel the weight of it pressing in on him, calling to him. He wanted more. He needed to have more. And he would not stop until he had it all. It was on a quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, that the call came. The serpent appeared again, this time in the center of the room, its massive coils forming a ring around JP. You are ready, the creature said. The world awaits. Your kingdom awaits. Take it. Claim it. JP's heart raced with anticipation. He could taste it now, the power, the control, the throne he had always dreamed of. He could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. He looked at the serpent, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "What do I need to do?" The serpent's eyes gleamed. "You need only reach out, JP. You need only take what is yours." The next day, JP stepped outside. The air felt different now, charged with a strange, unnatural energy. He looked around at his home, his prison, and realized it was no longer enough. The world beyond it was his true domain. And so, with the serpent's guidance, he began to make his move. Slowly, carefully, he reached out to those who could help him claim what he wanted. Those who could give him the power he craved. He began to manipulate, to control, to twist the hearts and minds of those around him. One by one, they came. First, the weak, the desperate, those who had nothing to lose. Then, the powerful, those who had always ruled from the shadows, watching him from afar. They came to him, drawn by his strange, magnetic aura. They saw something in him now, something they hadn't seen before. Power. And JP knew, he was only just getting started. Part 6, The Serpent's Dominion Expands. As the days turned into weeks, JP's transformation into the serpent's image became undeniable. His influence spread like wildfire, subtle at first but growing more intense with each passing day. No longer was he the lazy man who drifted through life, he had shed that skin, just as the serpent had shed its old form. He was reborn, and now, he was the one who commanded everything around him. The world outside his home was not as he had imagined. It was chaotic, filled with deception, greed, and violence. But to JP, it was beautiful. It was an endless field of opportunity, a domain to conquer, a kingdom that would bend to his will. And he knew exactly how to make that happen. It began with whispers, strange rumors in the markets, hushed voices in darkened alleyways. People spoke of him, of JP, the man who had risen from nothing, a mysterious figure whose ambition seemed boundless. His influence was growing, and the power he exuded was undeniable. Slowly, those who were hungry for something more, those who had long been living in the shadows, began to notice him. And then came the leaders, the people who controlled the wealth, the politics, the armies. They saw in him something dangerous, something that could change the balance of power. They wanted to understand him, to figure out if he was a threat or a pawn they could use. But they underestimated him. One evening, JP was alone in his study. His body no longer felt human, not fully, at least. His senses were heightened, his thoughts sharper than ever. He could smell the scent of the night air, hear the distant rustle of leaves, and even feel the vibrations of the earth beneath his feet. It was as if he could perceive everything around him, his awareness expanding to unnatural limits. The serpent's influence was all-encompassing now, guiding him, shaping his every thought. Suddenly, a knock on the door snapped him out of his reverie. He rose slowly, his movements fluid, almost hypnotic, and opened it without hesitation. Standing before him was a man dressed in fine robes, an envoy, unmistakably. His face was tense, his eyes darting around nervously, and he hesitated before speaking. "Are you JP?" he asked, voice trembling. JP smiled coldly, the corners of his lips curling upward in a way that sent a shiver down the envoy's spine. "I am." "What do you seek, messenger?" The envoy looked like he was about to turn and flee, but something in JP's voice held him in place. I come on behalf of the Council of Elders. They've heard of your rise to power. They want to meet with you. They think you could be useful to them." JP didn't respond right away. His eyes, glowing with the faintest yellow hue, scanned the envoy from head to toe. The man was clearly nervous, sweating, fidgeting. But what caught JP's attention wasn't his fear. It was his desperation. "You want me to meet with the council?" JP asked, his voice silky, yet sharp. "What makes you think I need them?" The envoy stammered, trying to regain his composure. The council controls everything. They control trade, the army, the laws of the land. If you want to make your power permanent, they could help you. A smirk curled on JP's lips. I need no one's help, he said, his tone low and dangerous. But I'm curious. Tell your masters I'll meet with them. The envoy's eyes widened. You will. Of course, JP replied, his eyes narrowing, a predatory gleam flashing across them. But understand this, when I speak, I don't ask for power. I take it. The meeting was set. The Council of Elders was a powerful faction that governed the land, controlling the economy, military, and the delicate balance of power between warring kingdoms. Their reputation was built on cunning, diplomacy, and ruthless politics. But JP had no intention of playing by their rules. The night before the meeting, JP stood alone in his room, staring into the mirror. The snake's essence filled him completely now, he could feel it in every fiber of his being. His skin had grown cold, and his reflection was nothing like the man he had been. As he looked into his eyes, he felt a sense of satisfaction, an overwhelming sense of purpose. His ambitions had already started to take root in the underbelly of society, but this meeting would be the catalyst. This was where he would make his move. The following morning, JP entered the council's grand hall. It was an imposing place, massive marble columns rose up into the vaulted ceilings, and an ornate table stretched across the center of the room. The elders were seated around it, each of them an influential leader in their own right. There were whispers as he walked in, the tension palpable. They had not expected him to arrive so soon, nor had they anticipated his presence to be so unsettling. But JP was undeterred. He walked into the room, every step echoing in the silence, his head held high, his posture confident. As he approached the table, the elders exchanged wary glances. Their leader, a tall, thin man with silver hair and a long, twisting beard, stood to greet him. Welcome, JP, the elder said, his voice smooth but tinged with an underlying unease. We've been hearing quite a bit about you lately. It seems you've made quite the impression. JP did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied the elder carefully, as if appraising him. I didn't come to impress. I came to offer you a deal. The elder raised an eyebrow. A deal? What kind of deal? JP smiled, a cold, snake-like smile that made the room feel colder. One where you bow to me, where you recognize me as your new leader. And in exchange, I'll allow you to keep what little power you have left. A stunned silence filled the room. The elders exchanged looks, some with anger, others with disbelief. One of them, an older woman with sharp features, stood and sneered at him. You're mad, boy. You think you can control us? You think we'll bow to you? You're nothing but a fool with delusions of grandeur. JP's smile remained, but there was a darkness in his eyes now, something that felt ancient, predatory. I'm not the one with delusions. You are. Without warning, JP raised his hand, and in that instant, a surge of power exploded from him. The room seemed to warp as the air itself thickened. The elders gasped, eyes widening in shock as they felt the weight of his presence crush them. You're going to obey, he hissed, his voice barely a whisper, but it carried through the hall like a command from a higher power. Or else. The woman who had spoken out before staggered back, fear in her eyes. What have you become? JP stepped closer, his eyes glowing brighter, the serpent's essence surging through his body. I've become the ruler you never saw coming. The king of snakes. The elders looked at one another, fear creeping into their expressions. They knew then that they had underestimated him. But it was too late for them. JP had already claimed his throne. Part 7, The Kingdom of Snakes. The days after the council meeting were a blur of power and control. JP's presence spread like a shadow across the land, his influence creeping into every corner of society. He had taken the council's offer, twisted it, and molded it into his own vision. The once dominant rulers of the land had bowed before him, offering their allegiance, their wealth, and their loyalty. Those who resisted were quickly dealt with, silent and swift. JP had no mercy for weakness. He was no longer the lazy, carefree man who once languished in his home. He was the Serpent King, and the world had become his domain. JP sat at the head of the grand table in his newly acquired palace. The long stone corridors, once cold and intimidating, now felt like an extension of his own will. The vast windows let in the sunlight, but the room felt dark, perpetually overshadowed by the weight of his power. He surveyed the room full of his new allies, high-ranking military leaders, wealthy merchants, nobles, all the once powerful men and women who had pledged their allegiance to him. Lara and his wives, too, were there, silenced, broken, their spirits crushed under the weight of JP's transformation. The walls were adorned with portraits of past rulers, but JP no longer cared about their legacy. The only legacy that mattered now was his own. "I've risen from nothing," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. "But now, I stand above all of you. And soon, the world will know who the true ruler is." The room was eerily quiet, each person hanging on his every word. It was clear that JP's power had become intoxicating, not only for him but for everyone around him. The scent of fear, the taste of anticipation, filled the air like an aphrodisiac. No one dared speak out. No one dared move. Lara, once his wife, sat quietly by the wall, her eyes hollow. She was a shell of the woman who had once tried to save him. The hope in her eyes had long since been replaced with resignation. Her heart had shattered under the weight of what JP had become, and there was nothing she could do to fix him. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting a dim orange glow over the horizon, JP made a bold decision. He stood on the balcony of his palace, staring out at the sprawling city below. His mind was already calculating, planning, thinking ahead. The snake's voice had returned to him, whispering promises of even greater power, of realms beyond his reach, of dominions that could be conquered. The hunger for more was gnawing at him, urging him forward. He needed to expand, to grow. But even more than that, he needed to prove that no one could stand against him. "Take them all," the serpent's voice echoed inside his mind. "Your power is limitless now. But only if you continue to rise. The kingdoms must fall. The rulers must bow to you, or they will fall." JP's eyes gleamed. "I know," he whispered to himself. "I know exactly what to do." He turned and looked at the gathered nobles, his allies, his subjects. He addressed them with a cold, confident tone, his every word laced with the venomous power that now surged through him. "The time has come to expand," he said. "I've conquered the council, I've taken their wealth, their armies. Now, I will take the kingdoms. This land will be mine, and soon, the world will kneel before me. No more weak kings. No more factions. Only one ruler. One true king." His words hung in the air like a heavy mist. The room was tense, but no one spoke out. No one dared challenge him. Lara looked at him from across the room, her gaze full of sorrow. "This is madness, JP," she whispered, though her voice barely carried over the silence. "This isn't you. You're losing yourself." JP's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark crossing his face. His lips curled into a wicked smile. "I am becoming who I was always meant to be. Who I always deserved to be. You couldn't understand, Lara. You couldn't comprehend what it takes to rule." Lara's heart sank, and for the briefest moment, she wished she could turn back time, before the transformation, before the darkness consumed him. But there was no turning back now. The war began within weeks. JP sent emissaries to the neighboring kingdoms, offering alliances. But these were no simple diplomatic talks. These were veiled threats, promises of domination, of overwhelming power. Some kingdoms folded immediately, surrendering their armies, their gold, their resources. They were too terrified of the Serpent King, too broken to resist. Others fought back, of course. They had seen the signs. They had heard the rumors. The serpent's influence was too great, too terrible to ignore. But those who fought against JP were quickly crushed. His soldiers, now loyal only to him, swept through the lands like a flood, devouring everything in their path. The cities fell one by one. The cries of the vanquished were drowned by the sounds of victory, the sweet music of total control. But it wasn't just the armies that fell to him, it was the hearts and minds of the people. JP had become a legend, a myth. The Serpent King who took everything, who crushed all who opposed him. He didn't just conquer lands, he conquered souls. As the final kingdom fell, JP stood atop a tower overlooking the vast landscape. His eyes glinted with satisfaction. The world was his. The armies had been defeated, the cities were his to rule, and those who had resisted had been eradicated. But even as he stood there, basking in his power, something gnawed at him, an insidious feeling that had crept into his thoughts. The serpent's influence had made him the ruler of everything, but what was the point of all this power if it left him feeling empty? He had everything, wealth, influence, fear, but it wasn't enough. The hunger for more never ceased. Take it all, the serpent's voice whispered again, this time colder, more commanding. Your power is limitless. But you must claim it all. You must become the god of this world. The words echoed through his mind, and he knew that the next step would be his final one. He had already shed his humanity. Now, he would shed everything else. He would not just be a king. He would be a god. And so, JP, the Serpent King, prepared for his final ascension. His power was absolute. But with that power came an inevitable question: what comes next when there is nothing left to conquer? The answer was simple: nothing. JP's reign had begun. And the world would never be the same again. Part 8, The Serpent's End. The world had bent to JP's will. Entire kingdoms had fallen, cities had burned, and his name was spoken with both awe and terror in every corner of the land. He was the Serpent King now, more than just a ruler, more than a conqueror. He was a god in the eyes of his subjects, a dark, twisted deity, feared by all and revered by none. Yet, in the silence of his palace, alone on the throne he had claimed, JP began to feel something that was new, and terrifying. Boredom. It started as a whisper in the back of his mind, an uncomfortable feeling that gnawed at him as he gazed out over the vast lands he had conquered. He had everything, wealth, power, followers, but it was as if something essential was missing. He had devoured it all, consumed everything in his path. There was no more conquest to be had, no more challengers. He had achieved his ultimate goal, but in doing so, he had stripped the world of any meaning. One night, as the moon hung high in the sky, JP stood on the balcony of his palace, staring out at the quiet city below. The streets were empty, the markets silent. There was no noise, no movement. It was as though the entire world had come to a halt. "What is this?" he muttered to himself, his voice low and hollow. "Is this all?" The serpent's voice echoed in his mind, a voice that had always promised him more. But now, it sounded distant, cold, even. "You are the ruler now. The world is yours." "But is it truly enough?" the serpent hissed, its voice laced with a strange sense of doubt. "There is no more to conquer. You have claimed everything, and yet, you feel empty." JP's heart clenched. He had been so consumed by his hunger for power, by his desire to become something more, that he hadn't noticed the emptiness creeping in. He had become the very thing he had feared, consumed by his own ambition until there was nothing left. He had taken everything, but he had lost himself in the process. Lara, who had been silent for so long, entered the room. She looked at him with eyes that seemed to have aged years in the span of weeks. The woman he had once loved, the woman who had tried to warn him, now stood before him as a mere shadow of herself. "You've destroyed everything, JP," she said softly. "You've taken everything, and now look at you. What are you now?" JP didn't turn to face her. His gaze remained fixed on the empty world below. "I'm nothing, Lara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I've become nothing. I've conquered everything, but I've lost everything. There's nothing left to rule." Lara's voice was filled with a strange sorrow. "No. You've lost yourself. You gave up who you were, and now you're just a monster. You were never meant to be a god, JP. You were meant to be a man." The serpent's voice grew louder, more insistent, as if it were sensing JP's doubt, sensing his growing unease. "You are the ruler, JP. You are the god. You cannot go back. You cannot undo what has been done." But JP no longer felt the hunger for power that had once consumed him. The weight of his ambition felt crushing now, a burden too heavy to carry. He had become a king of nothing. A ruler of an empty, lifeless world. "I've ruined it," JP said quietly, the realization settling in. "I've ruined everything. What's left for me?" As the final piece of his soul slipped away, JP's form began to tremble. His vision blurred, and his body felt like it was breaking apart. He heard the whispers of the serpent grow fainter and fainter, as if even the creature that had once possessed him was now retreating into the shadows. "What is happening?" he gasped, his breath shallow. "Why am I fading?" His body, once strong and unyielding, began to change once again. The serpent's power had given him everything he desired, but now, it was leaving him. He could feel his form shifting, the very essence of his being fracturing. In the silence of his palace, surrounded by the ruins of his own making, JP fell to his knees. His skin began to lose its human appearance, shifting back into scales, his body transforming into that of the serpent once more. But this time, it was different. The change was no longer glorious, it was a return to something worse. Something monstrous. The room around him seemed to spin as his vision darkened. The serpent's voice was distant now, a fading echo in his mind. "You have everything," it hissed, the words growing fainter. "But you were always meant to fall." JP's final breath was a rasping sigh as his form fully gave way to the serpent's cold, ancient shape. The palace, once a symbol of his power, now stood as a monument to his fall. And in the end, the serpent was alone. The world he had once ruled fell into chaos. With no true ruler, no guiding force, the kingdoms crumbled, and the people were left to fight amongst themselves. JP's name became a whisper, a warning, a tale of ambition gone too far. The serpent, who had once craved power and control, now found itself drifting in a void. There was no kingdom, no subjects, no throne. There was only an endless, lonely existence, a creature who had conquered everything, yet had lost it all in the end. The serpent had risen. And it had fallen. The end.